Welcome to World News Update. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. The Supreme Court has become the arena for a high-stakes constitutional clash between the White House and Illinois, temporarily blocking President Trump's plan to deploy federalized National Guard troops in Chicago. At issue: can the president seize control of a state's National Guard over the governor's objections, especially when the definition of rebellion is hotly contested? The administration claims Chicago's resistance to federal immigration agents justifies military intervention, while Illinois argues it's a dangerous overreach against lawful protest. With the justices allowing a lower court's block to stand, the nation now waits as the courts weigh the limits of presidential power and the rights of states. In a move that stunned both supporters and critics, President Trump unveiled a sweeping plan to federalize the Illinois National Guard. This unprecedented step was designed to address what the administration described as a rapidly escalating crisis in Chicago, where violence and unrest had reached new heights. The president's decision was not made lightly, and it reflected growing concerns about public safety and the ability of local authorities to maintain order. The plan called for deploying Guard troops to Chicago, where they would work alongside ICE agents during Operation Midway Blitz, a high-profile crackdown on organized crime and undocumented immigration that had already resulted in over 1,000 arrests. The presence of federal and military personnel on city streets marked a dramatic escalation in the government's response. As news of the deployment spread, protests erupted across the city. Demonstrators clashed with police, and some gatherings quickly turned violent. The administration argued that this level of resistance from protesters amounted to an outright rebellion, providing the legal grounds for invoking the president's authority under the Insurrection Act, a rarely used but powerful federal law. In response to mounting legal challenges, the administration filed an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. Their argument was clear: blocking the Guard's deployment, they claimed, put federal agents and national security at risk, especially as tensions continued to rise in the city. But the move was about more than just law enforcement. It was also a pointed message to sanctuary cities nationwide, signaling that the federal government was willing to take extraordinary measures to assert its authority and enforce immigration laws, regardless of local opposition. The decision sparked fierce debate. Critics condemned it as a dangerous last-resort escalation that threatened civil liberties, while the White House maintained it was a necessary step to restore order and protect communities from further violence. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's refusal to lift the block on the deployment forced the administration to pause its plans, leaving the president's strategy and the future of Operation Midway Blitz hanging in the balance. As the legal battle continues, the stakes remain sky-high. The outcome will not only shape the immediate situation in Chicago, but could also set a precedent for how far federal power can reach in times of domestic unrest. Illinois and Chicago, led by Governor Pritzker, fought back in court, calling the president's move an unconstitutional power grab. They argued the protests were protected speech, not rebellion, and that local law enforcement could handle the situation without military intervention. The state's lawsuit framed the president's actions as an assault on federalism, warning that federalizing the Guard without consent would shatter the balance of power. For city and state leaders, this was about defending constitutional rights and state sovereignty against what they saw as executive overreach. The legal battle began in the heart of Chicago, where a federal judge took the first bold step by blocking the president's controversial plan to deploy the National Guard. The courtroom was tense as arguments flew back and forth about the true nature of the unrest gripping the city. The judge found no evidence of rebellion, casting serious doubt on the administration's sweeping claims and questioning whether the situation truly warranted such drastic federal action. The case quickly moved up to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, where a panel of judges reviewed the lower court's decision and ultimately upheld the block on the president's order. The appellate judges emphasized that even disruptive protest did not amount to an insurrection, and therefore did not justify federalizing the Illinois National Guard. Refusing to back down, the administration swiftly appealed to the Supreme Court, hoping for a reversal that would restore the president's authority. Government lawyers argued that the president's power should be absolute in times of rebellion, insisting that the executive branch alone could determine when such measures were necessary. But the Supreme Court justices, after careful consideration, denied the administration's emergency request for immediate intervention, Their decision kept the restraining order firmly in place, signaling a strong reluctance to grant unchecked executive power, especially in such a politically charged moment. While the Supreme Court's move was not a final ruling on the merits of the case, it marked a significant victory for Illinois and served as a clear judicial check on the White House's ambitions. The legal fight, however, is far from over, as both sides prepare for the next round in this high-stakes constitutional showdown. A permanent injunction hearing now looms on the horizon, promising more heated arguments and national attention. For now, the courts have drawn a clear line against military intervention in Chicago, setting a powerful precedent for the limits of executive power. As legal arguments raged, Chicago's streets saw escalating clashes between federal agents and protesters. Operation Midway Blitz sparked mass resistance, with community groups monitoring ICE and staging protests. A flashpoint came when agents used tear gas on a crowd, including families, fueling outrage and court scrutiny over excessive force. These confrontations intensified the conflict, with each side seeing their narrative confirmed. Federal agents citing chaos, locals decrying government overreach. The cycle of protest and crackdown made the threat of military deployment even more alarming. Chicago's leaders argued these scenes proved the need to keep troops out, not bring them in. At the heart of the crisis were two fundamentally different visions of the Constitution, one emphasizing the supremacy of federal authority, the other fiercely defending the rights and independence of individual states. This conflict, rooted in centuries of American history, would soon play out on the national stage. The Trump administration invoked the Insurrection Act, a rarely used law, claiming the president had the power to federalize the National Guard in order to quell what it described as a rebellion in Chicago. The move was framed as necessary to restore order and protect federal interests, even as critics warned of its sweeping implications. Administration officials argued that the president's judgment in determining what constitutes a rebellion should be nearly absolute, especially when federal law enforcement efforts are being obstructed or undermined. They insisted that swift, decisive action was essential to maintain national security and uphold the rule of law. Illinois, however, countered that this interpretation of executive power was dangerously broad, threatening not only civil liberties, but also the foundational principle of state autonomy. State leaders argued that allowing the president unchecked authority would set a precedent that could erode local control and democratic freedoms. The state insisted that the National Guard is fundamentally a local force, meant to serve and protect the community under the governor's command. Only the most extreme and clear-cut circumstances, conditions that Illinois argued were absent in Chicago, could justify federalization of the Guard. Ultimately, the courts weighed in, agreeing with Illinois. They ruled that even disruptive protests do not amount to insurrection, and that the president's power to deploy federal forces is not unlimited, but subject to judicial review and constitutional checks. This landmark case has become a defining test of America's system of checks and balances, with the judiciary standing as a crucial bulwark against executive overreach and reaffirming the enduring tension between federal power and state sovereignty. The Supreme Court's refusal to greenlight the Guard's deployment has averted immediate crisis, but the constitutional battle continues. The outcome will set a precedent. Will presidents have broad power to use the military domestically, or will courts and states retain a check? If the president prevails, future leaders could deploy troops over policy disputes. If Illinois wins, judicial oversight and state sovereignty are reaffirmed. The case is a stress test for American democracy, forcing a reckoning over the limits of executive power and the rights of protest. The peaceful resolution of this standoff depends on respect for the rule of law and the court's final word. For now, the nation watches, reminded how fragile the balance between federal authority and liberty can be.